All characters and events in this story are the fruit of my imagination. If something seems like reality, it's just the stars aligning that way. Life is like a wheel, everything comes back in circles. Please don't judge too harshly. We are 100% against cheating, alcohol, anything prohibited, and any violation of the law. Write in the comments what city you are from and where you listen to this audio version. Share the vibe. Don't forget to like, tell your life story, and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with new exciting stories. James Clark ran his hand over the oil stain on his overalls as usual and sighed. The workday at the body shop was drawing to a close. It was getting dark outside the garage. The setting sun was slanting across the hood of the old pickup he was working on. James lowered the hood, wiped his hands on a rag, and glanced wearily at his watch. Almost 6 o'clock. Time to close. "Hey, Jim, want to go to the bar with me tonight?" A voice said behind him. It was Mike, his colleague and longtime friend. A tall, strong man, Mike was a couple of years younger than James and always tried to cheer him up. "Thanks, Mike, but I guess not," James replied quietly, closing the toolbox. "I'm not in the mood today." Mike nodded understandingly and took his jacket off the hook. "Are you thinking about it again?" he asked cautiously. James said nothing, only nodded slightly, looking away. In a couple of days, there would be a date he could never forget, the 20th anniversary of the day his daughter died. More precisely, the day when Linda told him that his newborn daughter had died in childbirth. His faith in justice had collapsed. Since then, this week in June has always been hard for him. Mike put his hand on his shoulder. "I know, buddy. If you change your mind, call. Or just come by, you know where to find us." "Thank you," James smiled weakly. "It's okay, I'm fine. I just want to stay home." Mike didn't insist. He gave his friend's shoulder a knowing squeeze and headed for the exit. "Take care, Jim. See you tomorrow." The shop fell silent as the door closed behind Mike. James leaned tiredly against the workbench. His gaze fell involuntarily on the old, faded photograph pinned to the wall above the desk, an ultrasound photo taken almost 20 years ago. A small, blurry spot that had been his daughter then. Their daughter with Linda. He had kept that picture all these years, not knowing why. Maybe it was the only memory of the child he had never met. James felt a lump in his throat. He tried not to think about it too often, but every anniversary the memories came flooding back. 20 years. If the girl had lived, she would be 20 now. What would she have been like? Who would she have become? These questions tormented him sleeplessly at night. He took a deep breath, put the photograph back under the glass cabinet, and began to close up the studio. After locking the gate and making sure all the equipment was turned off, James walked out into the parking lot. The evening air of a warm June day greeted him with a soft rustle of wind through the trees. His home was only a few blocks away, a small one-story house in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio. He usually walked the distance. On the way, James tried to push away the heavy thoughts. He thought that he had long since come to terms with the loss, but each anniversary reminded him how fresh the wound was. However, life went on. After Linda left, he was never able to create a new family. Of course, there were women, short romances, but nothing serious. It seemed to James as if part of his soul had died then, 20 years ago, along with the child. He devoted himself to work, sometimes met with friends, helped neighbors, but he almost never let anyone close to him. Approaching his house, James froze for a moment, as often happened. Somewhere in the depths of his heart lived an absurd hope that now his wife and child would meet him. But the house met him with silence and emptiness. He sighed heavily, took out the keys, and unlocked the door. It was cool and dim inside. James turned on the light. The house was modestly furnished. An old sofa in the living room, a bookcase, a television. On the mantelpiece were a few photographs, a young, smiling couple, James and Linda on their wedding day, then a smaller photo of Linda, her belly rounded, smiling, her hands on her unborn child. James had insisted on taking this photo as a keepsake when Linda was 8 months pregnant. She had laughed at his sentimentality. James felt a familiar longing squeeze his chest and turned away from the shelf. He went into the kitchen and put the kettle on. The loneliness, usually tolerable, was especially acute on days like these. While the water was heating, James mechanically sorted through the mail lying on the table by the door. Bills, advertisements. Nothing interesting. The kettle clicked as it boiled. He poured hot water over a tea bag and headed into the living room with a mug. But he had barely taken a sip when there was a soft knock on the door outside. James looked at his watch in surprise. It was already past 8 o'clock in the evening. Guests were not used to arriving at such an hour. He cautiously put down his mug and headed for the front door. A young girl of about 20 was standing on the porch. The stranger was noticeably nervous. She was shifting from one foot to the other, fiddling with the strap of her bag. When the door opened, she looked up at James. "Hello," she said uncertainly. "Sorry to disturb you. Are you Mr. James Clark?" James glanced quickly at the guest. The girl was thin, with light brown hair pulled back into a ponytail. Dressed simply jeans, a light blouse. Her face was excited, in her large brown eyes, a mixture of hope and excitement. He definitely didn't know her. "Yes, I'm James Clark," he answered slowly. "How can I help you?" The girl swallowed, clearly gathering her courage. "My name is Emma Davis," she said and paused, as if waiting for a reaction. The name meant nothing to James. He frowned in confusion. "Have we met, Emma?" "No, I mean, not personally," she said quickly. "I understand it's unexpected." She fell silent, looking down in confusion, then suddenly straightened up resolutely. "Mr. Clark, I ask you to listen to me. This is very important for me, and I hope for you too." James's throat went dry. The girl looked upset, but she clearly had come with some serious purpose. He stepped back and gestured for her to come in. "Of course, come in." Emma stepped over the threshold hesitantly. James pointed her towards the living room. "Come in, sit down." He himself felt his heart beating faster. An unbidden thought flashed through his mind. Had something happened? Maybe she was the daughter of someone he knew? Or, no, it was unlikely. Emma sat down on the edge of the sofa, her bag in her lap. James sank into the chair opposite her, tense and waiting. They were silent for a few seconds. The girl seemed to be choosing her words. "I know it seems strange." She finally began in a quiet voice. "You probably don't know me at all, but I've been looking for you for a long time." "Were you looking for me?" James's surprise grew. He looked closely at his guest. Something vaguely familiar flashed across her features, perhaps the line of her jaw or the shape of her lips. But he couldn't remember if they had met before. "Yes, I learned your name not long ago. Please allow me to explain. It concerns your past, and mine too." James's heart thumped loudly. At these words, anxiety stirred in his soul. "My past?" he asked hoarsely. The image of the daughter he had mourned for 2 decades suddenly came painfully to mind, though at first glance the connection was unclear. "What are you talking about? What do you mean?" Emma met his gaze. Her eyes glistened with moisture. Her voice broke. "20 years ago, you had a child. A daughter." The air seemed to freeze around him. James turned pale. He could barely speak. "My daughter? But she died in childbirth. That's what Linda, your wife, told you," Emma finished quietly for him. James stared at her, stunned. Linda, his ex-wife, whom he hadn't seen for almost 20 years. How did this girl know about Linda and the baby? "Who are you?" he whispered. His chest began to tingle painfully. "How do you know all this?" Emma took a deep breath, gathered her courage, and said in a trembling voice, "Because I am that same dead daughter." There was a moment of silence. Only the clock on the wall ticked away, counting down the seconds as James tried to process what he had just heard. He leaned forward slightly, thinking he had misheard. "Sorry. What? How? Please repeat." "My name is Emma," the girl said clearly, although her voice was shaking. "When I was born, I probably had a different surname. But now I am Emma Davis. I was born 20 years ago." and everything I have learned from the documents recently indicates that you are my biological father." James shook his head, feeling the room spinning. He leaned his elbows on his knees, trying to get his bearings. "No, no, it's impossible," he whispered. "My daughter. My wife said that our daughter didn't survive." His voice broke. Saying it out loud was unbearably painful even now. Emma quietly opened her bag and pulled out a folder with some documents. She handed the paper to James. He took the sheet with shaking hands. It was a birth certificate for the name Baby Girl Clark, date June 5, 2005, place of birth Columbus Hospital. Mother Linda Clark, father not listed. James recognized his wife's name and the date it was that very day. His hands shook even more. "I was born alive, Mr. Clark," Emma said softly, watching him read. "My birth mother, Linda, gave me up after I was born. I was placed for adoption through a private broker. I was adopted as a baby and raised by another family." James stared at the certificate, not believing his eyes. The line for father was blank, even though he and Linda had been married at the time. How could that be possible unless Linda had left him out, lying to everyone that she didn't have a father, or... He glanced up at the girl in front of him. She was looking at him expectantly, clearly worried about how he would react. "You mean to say..." James's voice was hoarse. "That Linda deceived me, that our daughter didn't die, but was alive all this time." Emma nodded sympathetically. "That's right. I'm so sorry you had to go through that lie." James's breath caught. He stood up, stepped back towards the fireplace, pressing his trembling fingers to the bridge of his nose. His heart pounded in his chest. So many years of grief, pain, and all for nothing. The child was alive. "This can't be," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "This just can't be." He frantically tried to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Linda had lied to him, but why? Why would she do such a thing? Emma continued carefully, not taking her eyes off him. "I myself found out about it not so long ago. I was adopted by wonderful people. I have a good family. But I always knew that I was adopted. Some time ago, I decided to find my biological parents." James turned slowly to her. The words "good family" sobered him up a bit. It turns out the girl really did grow up. Everything worked out for her. But he cleared his throat, trying to speak more calmly, although his voice still trembled. "And what did you find out?" Emma placed her palms on her knees, clasping them together as if she too was trying to control herself. "Officially, the adoption information was closed, but I had some data. For example, the name of the biological mother is Linda Clark, and the city is Columbus. I found out that Linda Clark was married to James Clark 20 years ago. That is, to you." She smiled timidly through the tears that glistened in her eyes. "It turns out that you are my biological father." James couldn't catch his breath. He looked at Emma, this living, breathing embodiment of the man he had mourned for 2 decades. She did have features that he recognized. Now, when she smiled slightly through her excitement, something vaguely reminded him of Linda in her youth, and perhaps of himself, too, in the soft lines of her face, in her gaze. "Oh God," was all he could breathe out, covering his face with his hand. "I don't believe it." Emma was silent, giving him time. For several long minutes, James simply tried to cope with the overwhelming emotions. Shock, joy, anger all mixed up. Finally, he lowered his hands and asked quietly, "Are you sure? I mean, do you really think that I'm your father?" Emma nodded very seriously. "At first it was just guesswork, but the more I learned, the more obvious it all became. Dates, names, and most importantly, if you confirm that Linda lied to you about the child." James's face twisted into a bitter smile. "Yes, now it's clear why she arranged the funeral so hastily and didn't let me find out anything. I was in such shock and grief that I took her word for it." He shook his head, remembering that terrible day. Linda was crying, saying that the child was stillborn. He didn't even demand an autopsy or to see the body. How could he? He loved his wife, trusted her completely then. I suppose you have some papers left, Emma asked quietly. The death certificate, for example, that Linda showed you. James racked his memory. Yes, he had a copy of the baby's death certificate. Somewhere among the papers. He hadn't even been able to read it then. Yes, somewhere, he said. I'll find it. He ran his hand helplessly through his hair, then looked at the girl. The girl was his daughter. It still didn't fit in his head. Look, Emma, he said, a little more collected. This is all amazing, but you have to understand I need to make sure. Emma nodded quickly. Of course, I understand. Do you want to do a DNA test? Yes, James answered bluntly, if you don't mind. I don't mind, she said seriously. Moreover, I want it. It's important for both of us to know the truth for sure. She spoke in a surprisingly mature tone, and James felt a surge of respect. Not every 20-year-old girl could handle such an emotional matter with such reasonableness. Okay, he straightened up, trying to pull himself together. I'll find out where I can get tested ASAP. There are probably labs here in Columbus that do paternity tests. Yes, there is. Emma relaxed a little, apparently glad that he wasn't rejecting her. I looked in advance. There's a DNA testing center in town. Could we give samples tomorrow morning? Of course, James agreed. He was eager to know the truth, although part of him was already almost certain, looking at Emma. But his mind demanded confirmation. What had happened seemed too incredible. There was a brief silence. James suddenly realized that he had been standing the entire time while his guest had been sitting. He sank awkwardly back into his chair. You live here in Columbus? He asked, realizing he knew nothing about the girl. I'm actually from Cincinnati, Emma replied. It's in Ohio, pretty far from here. I came to Columbus a couple of days ago, as soon as I found your contact information. You came alone? James asked, alarmed. A 20-year-old girl, a strange city. Emma smiled a little warmer. My mother is with me. Well, my foster mother. She supports me, but she's staying at the hotel now. She decided that I should talk to you alone first. James nodded, grateful for the care of the strangers who had raised his daughter. It's very kind of her, and brave of you to come like this. Emma looked down. I was afraid that you would drive me away or not want to listen. After all, so many years have passed, and it's all so terrible. Her voice trembled again. James felt deep compassion for the girl. It must have been difficult for her to decide. He said softly, Emma, if all this is true, you have no idea what a shock this is for me. Of course, I want to get to know you. I just need time to realize. I understand, she stood up. I'm sorry I came on you so suddenly. You probably need some time alone right now. James stood up too, meeting her gaze. Where are you going now? It's late. I'll go back to the hotel to see my mother, Emma answered. We've booked a room for a few days. Okay, tomorrow. He rubbed his wrist nervously. Tomorrow morning. I can pick you up, take you to the lab. What time is convenient for you? Emma thought for a moment. I think around 9 o'clock. Excellent. How can I contact you? They exchanged phone numbers. As James wrote down her number, he noticed that his hands were still shaking. On the threshold, before leaving, Emma suddenly blurted out, I've been dreaming of finding you for so long, and now you're like this. What kind? He asked quietly. Kind. Real, she smiled shyly. I'm glad I came. James's throat was dry. He forced himself to speak. Thank you for finding the courage to come to me. Emma nodded, and after a moment's hesitation, awkwardly extended her hand. James hesitated for a moment, then carefully put his arm around her. He felt her trembling in his arms and patted her back, though he could barely hold on. Everything will be fine, he said hoarsely, either to her or to himself. We'll figure it all out. After a minute, they pulled away. Emma wiped the corners of her eyes. Until tomorrow. See you tomorrow, he repeated quietly. James closed the door and stood in the hallway for a long time, trying to comprehend what had happened. His daughter was alive. The thought was so incredible that his mind refused to accept it. But his heart had already begun to hope. That evening, James could not sleep. After Emma had left, he sat in the living room for a long time in complete silence, trying to sort out the stunning news. Over and over again, the scene appeared before his mind's eye. A young girl standing in the doorway and saying, "I am your daughter." It seemed like something that only happened in the movies. My daughter is alive. Alive. This incredible realization sometimes soared into the sky in a hot wave of joy, then immediately crashed on the rocks of doubt and anger. How could Linda? Why did she do it? Around midnight, exhausted by his guesses, James finally called Mike. The friend, hearing his confused story, at first thought James was out of his mind. But when he realized that he was talking about a real girl and a real chance that his daughter was alive, Mike immediately rushed to him, despite the late hour. They sat in the kitchen, and James showed him the birth certificate that Emma had given him. Damn it! Mike breathed, skimming the document. It all fits. Linda's name, the date. Oh my God, Jim. James's hands shook as he poured himself a glass of water. I don't know what to think, he admitted hoarsely. If it's true, I'm speechless. Mike patted him on the shoulder. Let's wait for the DNA test. But honestly, I already have goosebumps. After all, you always said that something was strange back then. James nodded. Deep down, he had indeed replayed that tragedy many times, trying to understand whether it could have been prevented. Linda had insisted that he not see the child, saying it would be too painful. He had given in, barely hanging on. The funeral had also been rushed. Linda had said that was the custom with newborns. Everything had been so hazy. But who could have imagined such a deception? I would never have thought so. What are you going to do with Linda? Mike asked cautiously. James's jaw clenched. First, a test. If it's confirmed, then she'll get what she deserves from me. I don't know how yet, but she can't get away with this. Mike nodded grimly. I agree with you here. I have never heard such betrayal in my life. They discussed it until late at night, going over a multitude of issues. Mike promised any support. Closer to 2 o'clock in the morning, when fatigue was already making them sleepy, the friend insisted that James try to rest. You have to take a test tomorrow. You need to be in shape. After seeing Mike off, James went to bed, but sleep never came. He tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling. Emma's face kept popping up in his head, so worried, so similar to Linda and to someone else at the same time. Like me, he suddenly thought. Perhaps she had some of his features too. He was eager to find out for sure. In the morning, James got up very early. Despite the restless night, he felt cheerful, probably from a surge of adrenaline. After taking a shower and having a quick bite, he shaved more carefully than usual and put on a clean shirt. Everything inside was clenched from excitement, but at the same time, somewhere deep inside, there was a joy that he was afraid to let out yet. At exactly 8:45, he pulled up to the hotel in the city center where Emma and her foster mother were staying. Two women were standing at the entrance, talking. He recognized Emma immediately, although he had only seen her once her posture and hair stood out among the passers-by. Next to her was a woman of about 50, pleasant in appearance, holding herself with dignity. When James got out of the car, Emma noticed him and smiled happily. "Good morning, Mr. Clark," she greeted, approaching. "This is my mother, Susan Davis." The woman stepped forward. She had the kind, tired eyes of someone who had been worried about her daughter for the last few days. She was the first to extend her hand. "Hello, Mr. Clark. You can call me Susan." "Hello, Susan." James shook her hand. "And please, just call me James." They exchanged cautious smiles. Susan tilted her head slightly, looking at him. "Even if the DNA test is a formality," she said suddenly, quietly, "I can already see the resemblance. You and Emma have a very similar look when you're nervous." Emma was embarrassed. "Mom." James didn't know what to answer and just cleared his throat, feeling his face warm up. "Thank you. I guess. I'm glad to meet you, and I'm grateful that you support Emma." "She's my daughter," Susan said simply, looking at the girl softly. "And we've always tried to be honest with her. When she decided to find her birth parents, my husband and I accepted that. We knew that day would come one day." James's heart sank at the word daughter, but he reminded himself that nothing was certain yet. "It must have been difficult for you," he said. "Honestly," Susan smiled sadly, "it's scary, but we never wanted to deprive her of the knowledge of her own origins." Emma lightly touched her adoptive mother's hand. "We'll talk about everything later, Mom. Is it time for us to go?" "Yes, of course," Susan said. "I think I'll stay. I think you and James should go together." She was clearly trying to give them time together, a delicacy James appreciated. "We'll be back soon," he promised. Half an hour later, they were at the DNA Diagnostics Center. The paperwork took some time. James nervously filled in the fields: last name, first name, supposed relationship, father. The words stirred a wave of emotion in him. Emma sat next to him, quietly glancing at him. It seemed she was worried too. The procedure for taking samples was simple. A swab was taken from both of their mouths using a cotton swab. The lab technician, having written down the codes of the samples, reported, "The result will be ready in 3 working days. Should we call you or send it by email?" They agreed that the results would be emailed to Emma, who would immediately inform James. 3 days seemed like an eternity. As they left the lab, the bright sun almost blinded them. James closed his eyes for a moment. Emma stood next to him, clutching her purse with documents to her chest. She looked tense. "Is everything okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, I just realized that so much depends on this analysis now." "Me too," he said quietly. "These few days will be difficult." They headed to the car. James suddenly realized that he didn't want to let Emma go until the day of the results. He wanted to get to know her better, not to waste a minute, since fate had given him such a chance. But he was afraid to push her, knowing how much stress she was going through. However, to his relief, Emma herself timidly asked, "James, can I ask you a favor?" "Of course. About anything." "Could you show me around the city?" She smiled shyly. "I've never been to Columbus before, and I'd like to see where you live, work, if that's convenient for you." His heart jumped with joy. "I'll be happy to show you," he said sincerely. "Let's go right now." "Go ahead if you don't have other plans." "There are no more important plans for me right now," he admitted. Emma laughed with relief. It seemed she wanted to spend time with him too. They spent the rest of the day together. James took Emma to his auto repair shop, which was still closed that morning. He showed her his work area, his tools, even the old pickup truck he had fixed the day before. Emma listened with interest to his stories about his work, asked questions. Then they stopped at a nearby cafe for a bite to eat. Over lunch, the conversation became more relaxed. Emma told a little about herself. She is a sophomore at the University of Cincinnati, studying social work. She likes to run in the mornings, adores 80s music. Although she was born much later, this passion was instilled by her adoptive father, a big fan of classic rock. James hung on her every word, greedily absorbing the details of her life. A couple of times he even almost called her daughter out loud, but stopped himself in time. He was afraid to scare away the fragile connection, not yet secured by the test results. In response, he shared stories about himself, how he had become fascinated with cars as a young man, how he had opened his own workshop. He told her about his house, his neighbors, how in his free time he liked to tinker with an old Ford in the backyard, dreaming of restoring it someday. He did not yet talk about how empty his existence had been all these years. He did not want to burden Emma with feelings of guilt or pity, but it seemed that she had already read between the lines. They returned to the hotel in the evening. Susan was waiting in the lobby and greeted them with visible relief. Apparently, she was worried whether everything had gone well. Seeing the smiles on James and Emma's faces, she calmed down. "How are you?" she asked as the 3 of them sat down in the hall. "Okay," Emma replied. "We had a great time. James showed me around the city." Susan looked at him gratefully. Thank you. I myself enjoyed it, he responded. After a short silence, James decided to touch on the issue that was troubling him. Susan, may I ask, what do you know about the circumstances of Emma's adoption? Susan and Emma looked at each other. Apparently, they had been expecting this conversation. We don't know much, Susan began cautiously. My husband and I had been trying to have a child for a long time, and then we decided that adoption was our path. We contacted a private broker here in Ohio. Almost immediately, we were told that there was a newborn girl whose mother wanted to give her up. Did they tell you your mother's name? James asked. Yes, Susan sighed. They told us the mother was Linda Clark, and she signed a waiver. The only thing they said about the father was that he was unknown or not involved. James's fists clenched. So Linda officially wrote that the father is unknown, he said gloomily. It looks like it, Susan nodded. The paperwork was done by a lawyer named Richard Barnes. He specialized in private placements for children. Did you ever think there might be something untrue in it? James asked, trying to sound polite. Susan thought about it. You know, I had my doubts then. Usually, with an open adoption, there is some communication with the biological parents, at least indirectly, and here everything was very anonymous. But Richard assured us that the mother did not want disclosure, and that the situation was complicated. He made it clear that, let's say, the family there was dysfunctional, that there was no father, and the mother did not want a child due to life circumstances. James gave a wry smile. Dysfunctional family, that means he's talking about me. Susan blushed in embarrassment. I'm sorry, I didn't know any details then. Of course, we didn't ask any unnecessary questions. We wanted a child so much. Emma was such a tiny, wonderful baby, we fell in love with her right away. Emma touched her mother's hand. Everything is fine, Mom. No one is blaming you for anything. Of course, James added quickly. You couldn't have known. It's Linda's fault, and probably that middleman if he knew of my existence. I think he did, Emma said quietly. After all, Linda was married to you. It wouldn't have been hard to find out, even if she was lying about the father being unknown. Kodo deliberately turned a blind eye to it. Yes, James agreed bitterly. It turns out that both of them deliberately hid me. For a moment everyone was silent, digesting what they had heard. Then Susan said timidly, James, we have a question for you too. Yes, sure. Emma told me that Linda told you then that the child had died. I can't imagine how you felt. But you really didn't suspect anything. There was no condemnation in the adoptive mother's voice, but rather sympathy and a desire to understand. James looked down. No, I was absolutely sure that our daughter was dead. Linda showed me the death certificate. She grieved very convincingly. I myself was in such a state that I could not even imagine. His voice trembled with memories. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to open the wound, Susan said softly. Nothing, he shook his head, gathering his courage. I've kept that document. I think it's a fake. I'll have to check. We'll definitely check, Emma said firmly. When the DNA results confirm everything, we'll have to act. James looked at her. Despite her excitement, there was determination in her eyes. His own indecision seemed to evaporate. He felt that he would not rest until the truth prevailed. Yes, he said, we'll do that. The remaining days of waiting dragged on painfully. James saw Emma every day. He invited Emma and her mother to dinner at his house, where Susan also met Mike, who had dropped in to support his friend. The atmosphere was warm. Mike entertained the guests with stories from James's youth, which James sheepishly brushed aside. Emma laughed, and the sound of her laughter warmed James from within. He increasingly enjoyed watching her. Now she listened attentively, her head bowed, just as Linda did when she was absorbed in something. Now she wrinkled her forehead, intently studying a photograph from an old album. In this gesture, James recognized himself. They all looked at the photos of the past together. James and Linda's wedding, their house, pictures of the young couple in front of the Christmas tree, Linda pregnant. Emma eagerly absorbed every detail of the life she came from. Susan asked James about those times with interest, tactfully avoiding painful moments. It seemed that over these few days, the Clark and Davis families had begun to gradually become closer, connected by one girl. James himself felt a strange change. A week ago, his house had been quiet and empty, but now in the evenings it was filled with voices, laughter, the smell of the dinner that Susan had volunteered to cook as a token of gratitude. It was unusual, but pleasant. However, whenever he was alone, he was tormented by questions about Linda. Anger rose in waves as he remembered how much grief she had cost him. Mike barely had time to cool his ardor, judiciously saying, "First wait for the result, and then ring all the bells." James agreed, but in his heart he had already firmly decided. As soon as the test confirmed paternity, he would hold Linda accountable, no matter what the cost. Finally, the day came when the results were due. It was the morning of the third day. James woke up at dawn, completely exhausted. He had barely slept the night before. By 8 in the morning, unable to bear it any longer, he was already standing by the window, waiting for a call or a message. Finally, around 9:30, the phone rang. It was Emma. "James, the results are in," she said excitedly. And his heart seemed to stop for a moment. 99.9%. "You are my father," Emma's voice broke on the last words. James's eyes darkened with emotion. He exhaled as if he had regained his breath. "God, Emma, I I don't even know what to say." She was clearly crying into the phone, but she was crying from happiness. "Hello, Dad. I guess I can do this now." His legs gave way, and he sank into a chair. Tears sprang to his eyes, and his voice trembled. "My daughter." This word was spoken for the first time quietly, carefully, like a treasure. On the other end of the line, Emma sobbed. For a few moments, they simply cried into the phone, sharing a feeling that didn't require words. Finally, James, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, said quietly, "We must see each other. I'll come right away." "Yes, please," Emma nodded, and James could almost hear her smile through her tears. "Mom and I are at the hotel. We're waiting for you." James was there half an hour later. Emma ran out to meet him in the parking lot and hugged him without holding back. James held her tightly, feeling the little heart beating under her jacket. His daughter, alive, real, here she was in his arms. He repeated over and over, "Everything is fine. Everything is fine, daughter." Susan watched nearby, also wiping away tears of joy. This moment was worth all the stress. When all three had calmed down a little, they went up to the hotel room. There, sitting down in the armchairs, James said seriously, "Well, there are no doubts now. We need to decide what to do next." Emma also became serious. "Something needs to be done about Linda. She has no right to just walk away from responsibility after everything." Susan placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder. Maybe you should just talk to her first. Maybe she has an explanation." But James shook his head sharply. "No explanation will justify what she did. I want the truth to come out. She committed a crime, forged a document, separated me from my child." "Yes, but 20 years have passed," Susan said softly. "It's not clear. Is it possible to bring her to justice now?" "We'll check," James snapped. "I'll hire a lawyer if necessary. Let them dig." Emma nodded vigorously. "I agree. I also want to know the whole truth, and for her to answer for her lies." James, though he was seething, saw that Susan looked worried. "Susan, do you mind? I don't want to get you into trouble." She sighed. "My husband and I discussed it this morning when we found out the result. Of course, we don't want any scandals. But Linda behaved terribly, and most of all to both of you. Emma wants justice, and we will support her. At the very least, Linda should explain herself to you and to her." "Thank you," Jay said quietly. They decided that the first step was to contact a lawyer who was knowledgeable in family and criminal law. On the advice of Mike, who had learned about it through a friend, they chose an experienced lawyer named Kate Thompson. Kate agreed to see them that afternoon. At the appointed time, James, Emma, and Susan entered a small law office in the city center. Kate Thompson was a short woman of about 40, with a firm handshake and a penetrating gaze. After hearing the gist of the case, she did not hide her surprise. In 15 years of practice, I have never encountered a case where a mother would fake the death of her child and give him up for adoption, Kate admitted. It is unprecedentedly vile. James nodded grimly. Now you understand why we are so determined to see this through to the end. Of course, Kate looked at him sympathetically, then at Emma. Your daughter has every right to know the truth. And you, Mr. Clark, too. She clicked her pen and became businesslike. First of all, we need evidence. That is, we have DNA results, they confirm the relationship. Emma's birth certificate, where the mother is Linda, the father is not indicated. The death certificate that Linda gave you, I hope it has been preserved. Yes, James confirmed. I can bring a copy. Excellent. It will need to be checked through the Civil Registry Office to see if the death was officially registered. If not, it is a fake. Kate wrote everything down on a list. Next, she continued, we need adoption papers. Do you have them? She glanced at Susan. I only have a copy of the birth certificate and the adoption certificate, Susan replied. We can request the full adoption file through the court if necessary. We will, the lawyer nodded. But it would be better to find that intermediary you mentioned, Richard Barnes. He might be aware of the situation. He was a lawyer. He was working in Toledo at the time, Susan clarified. We adopted through him. Kate made a note. I'll look for information on whether he's still working. He might still be practicing. Even if he's not, we'll try to contact him. I think if he helped to illegally conceal information about his father, he could be subject to punishment. That should motivate him to talk. Emma nervously fidgeted with the hem of her jacket as she listened to Kate methodically lay out the plan. What about Linda? The girl suddenly asked. Can you get her involved somehow? Kate folded her arms. This is a difficult moment. On the one hand, there was definitely deception and, probably, forgery of documents. On the other hand, a lot of time has passed. The statute of limitations for some articles may have expired, but something can be done. At a minimum, file a civil lawsuit for moral damages, illegal deprivation of parental rights. Well, and the criminal side forgery of official documents depending on the laws of the state, this could be prosecuted if new facts emerge. James leaned forward. Even if she is not punished directly by law, I want her to bear at least reputational responsibility, so that everyone knows what she did. There was steel in his voice. Emma squeezed her father's hand, nodding. She agreed. We'll try to do everything possible, Kate assured. First, we'll collect evidence. Today, I'll send a request to the archives of the hospital where the birth presumably took place. By the way, where was Emma born? It says here in Columbus, James replied. It was probably the suburban hospital where we lived at the time. He named the hospital that he remembered, St. Mary's Hospital Maternity Ward. I see. We'll request a birth record there. We'll also request a death certificate from the database. Kate stood up. I think we need to involve a detective in the case to find Linda's current location and find out her current last name, if she has changed it. I know she left Columbus after the divorce, James put in, and I think she remarried, but I don't know the details. Well, we'll find it, the lawyer said confidently. As soon as something becomes clear, I'll let you know. In the meantime, prepare copies of all the documents you have. They said goodbye to Kate, thanking her for her promptness. James and Emma felt anxious, but at the same time relieved. The case had moved forward. Now they were not alone in their quest for justice. The days following the visit to the lawyer were filled with feverish work gathering evidence. James threw himself into it, as if it could calm the storm of emotions inside him. Emma and her adoptive parents had to return home to Cincinnati in a few days. The work week was starting, and Susan and her husband could not be away from work for long. But they promised to come back whenever needed. Emma, saying goodbye, hugged James tightly. I'll be in touch every day. We'll get this done together, Dad. He stroked her back, trying not to show the melancholy that had washed over him from the separation. Of course, my daughter. I promise everything will be fine. Left alone, James concentrated on the investigation. The first thing he did was find the same folder with the documents from 20 years ago at home. Deep in the closet, among the old papers, there was a thin file that he had not taken out almost since the divorce. Inside, in addition to the marriage certificate with Linda and their divorce papers, there was also the very same death certificate of the newborn. James held it with trembling hands. A fake. Once he had not even looked at it properly, pain clouded his eyes. Now he examined every line. Mother's name, Linda Clark. Child's name, girl, surname Clark, did not live a day. Cause of death, acute respiratory failure of the newborn. At the bottom was the seal of St. Mary's Hospital and the signature of some doctor. James's heart was filled with bitterness. How many lies in one dry form? He took a copy of this certificate to Kate. She assured that she had requested a death record from the official registry and was awaiting confirmation that there was no record. About a week had passed since the DNA results had arrived. Emma had been calling or writing daily to inquire about the progress of the case. James had kept her informed. Kate was working hard. She quickly found out that attorney Richard Barnes was still practicing, albeit in another state. He had moved to Indiana. She managed to talk to him on the phone. At first, Barnes was wary of her questions, but as soon as Kate mentioned possible liability for complicity in fraud, he became more accommodating. Barnes confirmed that in 2005, a certain Linda Clark had approached him, wanting to privately arrange the adoption of her newborn daughter. She assured her that the child's father was unknown, and in general that the child was not wanted by anyone. Barnes did not go into the moral aspects. In fact, he specialized in such cases, receiving a fee for speed and confidentiality. Linda signed the child's renunciation papers, listing the father as unknown. A couple of weeks after the birth, Barnes arranged for the baby to be handed over to the Davis family, acting as their legal representative. He claimed that he had no knowledge of the deception regarding Linda's husband. He thought that Linda was truly alone. However, Kate later noted to James that this should not be fully believed. Everything turned out too convenient for everyone except the deceived father. But the main thing is that Barnes agreed to provide copies of those old documents if he received an official request. This was a success. The evidence was starting to come together. Next, Kate received a response from St. Mary's Hospital. According to the archived discharge summary, on June 5, 2005, Linda Clark gave birth to a girl weighing 3.2 kilograms, gestation period 39 weeks. The birth went without complications. The child is healthy. The father was not listed in the hospital documents. Apparently, Linda told the staff that the father was not around. Another detail, a day after the birth, on June 6th, Linda and the girl were discharged from the hospital. Discharged alive, emphasized Kate, showing James a copy of the discharge summary. He read these words and felt a surge of rage. While he was going crazy with grief, his wife went home with their living child in her arms, only to immediately give her away to strangers. How did she even do that? James wondered, sitting in Kate's office. Didn't anyone at the hospital ask about her husband? We were married. I thought about it, Kate said, rubbing her chin. Perhaps Linda registered under her maiden name, or said that her father would not be on the documents. It is not uncommon in the US for the father to be omitted, especially if the woman is alone or wants to hide the father's identity. James shook his head. It turns out she was very smart and calculating. She thought everything through to the smallest detail. Yes, the plan was cynical, the lawyer agreed. But now we have enough paper evidence that the child did not die, that Linda abandoned him. It remains for me to connect this with her lie, said James. The death certificate is proof. Exactly. By the way, the official response came from the records office. There is no record in the state registry of the death of Linda Clark's child on June 5, 2005. That is, the document she gave you is not real. James gave a wry smile. Not surprising. Kate leaned back in her chair. I'll be honest, Mrs. Clark, or rather, whatever her current name is, we still have to find out. committed a whole bunch of violations. There was document forgery and providing false information when applying for guardianship, and possibly violating the father's rights to the child. The latter is not always easy to impute, but given that you were officially married, she did not have the right to decide on her own. Can you present all this officially? James asked. We'll file a police report, attach all our data. I think the district attorney will be interested, but you have to understand, 20 years have passed. The court may say that the statute of limitations has expired. And the moral damage, intervened Emma, who was participating in the video conference that day. She called every day, and today Kate, with her consent, connected her via video conference. A civil claim for damages is possible, Kate nodded. The chances of winning are good, given the flagrant nature of the fraud. But I suspect money is not the most important thing for you. It's not important at all, James confirmed. The important thing is the truth and its responsibility. Emma shook her head from the screen. I want her to at least apologize. No, to admit that she acted terribly. The girl's eyes flashed. James clenched his fists. She will admit it. She will have nowhere to escape the facts. Kate placed her palm on the documents. Well, we have the facts. The main question remains, where is Linda now and how to meet her? She filed for divorce almost immediately after giving birth. I tried to find her right after the divorce, James recalled. But then she seemed to disappear. She changed her phone number, moved out of the apartment she was renting. I didn't know where she went. We could hire a private detective to look for her, Kate suggested. But let's try the official databases first. She could have changed her name. Yes, most likely, James agreed. If she got married. He paused, then added, I have an idea. Linda had a friend, Sarah Wilson. They worked together at the same time. Maybe Sarah knows something. Try to contact. Kate approved. Any clue will help. James found Sarah Wilson through co-workers at his previous job. Luckily, she still lived in Columbus. They called each other and agreed to meet at a coffee shop. Sarah wasn't surprised to hear James's name. It turned out she remembered it and was glad to receive an unexpected call. She was a woman in her 40s with a friendly smile, but when the conversation turned to Linda, her face became serious. I haven't spoken to Linda in a long time, Sarah admitted, stirring her coffee. After she quit and left, we lost touch. But I know a little about where she went then. James sat opposite, feeling a spark of hope. What do you know? Please tell me. Sarah sighed. To be honest, that story was very strange. Linda, after what happened with the child, quickly went back to work, you know. No, I didn't know, James frowned. Linda hadn't told him, but he remembered that she had actually gotten a new job about 2 months after losing the baby. Yes, Sarah nodded. She moved to another department in our company, then suddenly announced that she was quitting and moving to Cleveland. This was at the end of that year. Cleveland? James asked. That's another big city in Ohio, quite a ways away. Yeah, and Sarah lowered her voice. They said that she wasn't alone there, but with a man. James felt a chill inside. What kind of man is he? Sarah shrugged. It's not known for sure. There were rumors that even before she left, she had her eye on one of our clients. He was from Cleveland, I think, a businessman. I don't know his name, but in general, many guessed that Linda had a suitor. James gritted his teeth. So while he was going crazy with grief and trying to rebuild his life, Linda already had someone and settled down in another city. You say she quit at the end of 2005. Something like that. Honestly, we weren't that close, just colleagues. But she seemed to me then poisonously calm or something. At first, everyone sympathized with her. Her child died. It was terrible. And a couple of months later, she was like nothing had happened, working, laughing. Sarah shook her head. I then decided that maybe a person experiences grief like that suddenly starts crying quietly. But now, if what you told me on the phone is true. She shook her head indignantly. It turns out that she simply wasn't worried to begin with, knowing that the girl was alive. It's true, James said quietly. He had told Sarah in advance why he wanted to find Linda, and she had reacted with understanding and indignation. How can this be? You poor thing, Sarah covered his hand with her palm sympathetically. I always thought you were a good guy, and that Linda was happy with you. I didn't expect this from her. James looked away, embarrassed. Thank you, Sarah. The main thing now is to find her. Do you have any contacts? Sarah thought. I remember she called work once from Cleveland, talked to our boss. She later said that Linda had settled in well, that everything was all right for her. It seems that she really did marry that man, and they had a child a year or two later. This news shocked James, but he restrained his emotions. So, she has a new family there. Yes, her name has definitely changed. The boss mentioned that she is now Mrs. Miller, if I'm not mistaken. Miller? He asked. So she married Robert Miller. Maybe, Sarah shrugged. I don't remember the first name, but the last name definitely sounded like Miller. I see, James said, his hands shaking under the table. Linda Miller, that's something. At least we know where to look. And the address or contacts. He began, but Sarah waved her hand. Unfortunately, no. But if the last name is known, is it difficult to find out? Yes, we'll try through the official databases, James nodded. Thank you very much, Sarah. You've been very helpful. She smiled sadly. I hope everything works out for you. And take care of yourself. Justice must prevail, but know that this whole story is a strong blow. I can handle it, he answered firmly. Thank you for your support. Inspired by the new information, James immediately called Kate and passed on the information. Perhaps Linda was living in Cleveland under the name Miller and was married. Kate was not famous for her efficiency for nothing. The very next day, she contacted him, saying, There is a result. I pulled up the database of driver's licenses and tax records. Linda Miller, 45, lives in Cleveland, Ohio. Maiden name is Clark, that is, our Linda. There is an address, too. James felt his pulse quicken. Now that a specific location had been identified, it was all becoming real. What next? He asked. Officially, we can send her a subpoena or a request for a meeting through a lawyer. But given the nature of the situation, I want to see her in person, James said decisively. There was a pause on the line. Then Kate answered, I understand your desire, but I recommend that one of the lawyers or representatives be present so that the conversation does not get out of control. You can come with us if you want, James suggested. I think it would be right if I came with you, and perhaps the detective I brought in for the criminal part. Suddenly, she wants to destroy something or run away. Okay, let's do that, James agreed. He called Emma and told her that Linda had been found. The girl immediately announced that she would go too. I have to be there and hear everything myself. There was no point in arguing, it concerned her no less than him. They agreed to meet in Cleveland the following Saturday. It was the most convenient. Emma was free from school, James could also ask for time off, and Kate could make arrangements with the local detective. The day of the meeting arrived. James left early in the morning and reached Cleveland by midday. Emma had arrived there by bus in the morning. She had left Cincinnati in the evening. They met at the agreed place, a coffee shop not far from Linda's address. James, seeing Emma, hugged her tightly. He was worried about her. How are you? Ready for this? Emma pulled back and looked into his eyes. Her face was tense but determined. Honestly, I'm scared, but I know I have to do it. James nodded. If you feel bad, tell me, okay? Okay, she squeezed his hand. A few minutes later, Kate pulled up. She was with a short, stocky man, the Cleveland police detective she had recruited. He introduced himself. Mark Stevens, a detective with the Cleveland Police Department. James and Emma responded with their names. The detective was deadly serious. I have already familiarized myself with your materials. I admit I am in shock, but I hope that today we will hear a confession from Mrs. Miller. Are you going to arrest her? Emma asked anxiously. Stevens shrugged. First, I want to hear what she has to say. I don't have an official warrant yet. An investigation is needed. But if she admits to forgery, a case may be opened. Kate added, "We have informed the local authorities that we want to question her voluntarily. This is not a formal interrogation yet. She is not an accused. But they already have control over the information." James listened with half an ear, his heart pounding in anticipation of what was to come. He would see Linda for the first time in 20 years. Would he be able to contain himself? Emma quietly took him by the elbow. "Let's go, Dad." He nodded. They all headed towards Linda's house. The house was in a quiet suburban area, a neat two-story cottage with light walls and a green lawn. James's heart sank at the sight of this idyll. Linda seemed to be living quite well. Light and movement were visible in the windows of the lower floor. Apparently, someone was home. James, Emma, Kate, and the detective stopped at the gate. Kate looked at them. "Ready?" James took a deep breath, exchanged a glance with Emma, and nodded firmly. "Yes." They walked up the driveway and to the front door. Detective Stevens stepped forward and knocked firmly. James felt his palms grow sweaty. Beside him, Emma exhaled softly, squeezing his hand. A few seconds later, footsteps were heard outside the door. The lock clicked. The door swung open, and James saw Linda for the first time in 20 years. She had changed, as had he. A little fuller in the face, slight wrinkles around the eyes, hair that had once been dark, now streaked with gray, but the same familiar features. Linda recognized him instantly, her eyes widening, her face pale. "James?" she breathed, clearly stunned. Her gaze darted to the others, the young girl next to him, and the two unfamiliar adults. Detective Stevens produced his identification. "Mrs. Miller, Detective Stevens, Cleveland Police. May I speak with you?" Linda blinked, looking confusedly from the ID to the faces in front of the door. She looked hunted. "About what? What's the matter?" Her voice trembled. James stepped forward, no longer hiding his feelings. "About our daughter, Linda. Do you remember the girl you gave birth to 20 years ago?" Linda recoiled as if struck, her hand clutching the door frame convulsively. "I don't understand." She tried to close the door, but the detective gently held her back. "Please, madam, we'd better go inside and discuss this calmly." Linda's gaze shifted from James's face to Emma's, as if trying to guess who this girl was. Emma was tensely silent, her eyes never leaving her mother. "My family is here." Linda began quietly, looking around. "We don't want to attract any attention either," Kate said firmly. "I think you should listen." Linda hesitated for another moment, then, as if afraid that the neighbors would hear, reluctantly stepped back, letting the unexpected guests into the hallway. "Okay, come in." Her voice was barely audible. They walked into the living room. The house inside looked cozy and modern, family photos on the walls, children's toys in the corner. James noticed a picture out of the corner of his eye. Linda next to a handsome man and two teenage children. His heart sank. Here it was, her new life. Linda, noticing the direction of his gaze, frantically turned over the frame of the photo lying on the shelf, as if ashamed. "Explain what's going on," she demanded, trying to regain her confidence. "You're showing up in a crowd. Detective, James, what are you trying to achieve?" Before James could answer, Emma stepped forward. She pulled down her hood, revealing her face. Tears glistened in her eyes, but her voice was clear. "Mrs. Miller, or should I say Linda, my name is Emma, Emma Davis, and as far as I know, 20 years ago, you gave birth to me." Linda froze. She looked at Emma as one looks at a ghost incredulously, with horror. Her lips moved silently. "No, no, this is a mistake. My daughter died." Emma smiled bitterly. "No, I'm not dead. I'm alive, and I'm standing in front of you." Linda shook her head, stepping back. She pressed her hand to her mouth, as if trying to hold back a scream. James stepped closer, anger seething. "Do you recognize her now, Linda? This is our daughter, the one whose death you faked." "Don't say that." Linda breathed out, her eyes darting around like a cornered animal. It's not true. It's true, Kate said firmly, pulling papers out of the folder. We have proof, Mrs. Miller. A DNA test confirming that James is Emma's father. A hospital discharge report stating that the child was born alive and healthy. Emma's adoption papers from 2005. The detective also stepped forward. I advise you to cooperate, Linda. Your lie has been kept for 20 years, but now the truth has come out. Linda looked around at them and suddenly exploded. So what? What do you all want from me? Her voice rang with hysterical notes. 20 years have passed. You came to... To what? Emma took another step towards her mother, tears streaming down her cheeks. How could you? How could you abandon me, your daughter? Lie to everyone that I died. Why didn't you give me to my father? Linda clenched her fists and her face twitched. I had no choice. James couldn't resist. There was no choice? You stole our child from me, Linda. You stole 20 years of my life that I could have spent with my daughter. His voice broke into a scream. Quiet. Linda looked back at the door in fear. No need to shout. Are you afraid your family will hear? James chuckled bitterly. Have you ever thought about what happened to me? You made me mourn a living child. Linda straightened up, trying to maintain a semblance of dignity. I know it was painful for you, but it wasn't easy for me either, believe me. Not easy. James's eyes flashed. You have no idea. Emma cut in, cutting him off. Why did you do this? Explain, I want to understand, she sobbed. I grew up in a loving family, yes, but why did you decide that you have the right to do this? Linda covered her face with her palms for a second, then abruptly dropped her hands. Okay, you want the truth? You'll get it. Her voice became cold, and there was a protective malice in it. Yes, I gave the child away, because I didn't want to raise him, because I wasn't going to suffer in poverty all my life with a man who couldn't even make a normal career. She glanced at James, full of old grievances. We were barely making ends meet. Your auto repair shop was a pittance back then. I didn't want such a future for myself or my child. James turned white at these words, but Linda did not stop talking, as if she had burst out. And yes, I had fallen out of love with you by that time. You had become withdrawn, stubborn. I met another man, a successful one, who was able to give me a new life. Robert Miller, James prompted quietly with a bitter smile. Your current husband, I understand? Linda raised her chin defiantly. Yes, so what? I needed to get rid of the past to start over with him. He didn't know about the baby. I told him the baby died. I was afraid it would complicate our lives together. Emma covered her mouth with her hand in shock. You say, this meaning me? You deprived me of my father because of a man? Don't you dare judge me, Linda snapped, her eyes flashing. You have no idea what it was like for me. I was young and stupid when I got pregnant with James's baby. At first I thought I could handle it, but then I realized, I don't want this. I don't want to sit on maternity leave while my loser husband tinkers with cars. Every word she said struck James's soul like a whip. He clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. The detective placed a warning hand on his shoulder, but James did not move, only his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. So the whole reason is your greed and selfishness. Linda snorted. Call it what you want. I provided my daughter with a good family, much better than I could have given her myself. You deprived her of her father, he snapped back. You deprived me of my daughter. Emma looked at her mother in horror. How could you decide that you are allowed to decide for everyone? For me? For Dad? Linda breathed heavily as she looked at them, her eyes warring with different emotions, anger, fear, and perhaps a hint of guilt. It was a long time ago. She finally squeezed out more weakly, as if defending herself from her own torment. I thought it would be better this way. You both would forget and move on. Forget it, James exclaimed. Do you even understand that I have not lived a single day without thinking about loss? Life was not sweet to me. I sympathized with you as a mother. I thought you filed for divorce because you could not bear the loss of our daughter, and you simply found yourself another man, and for his sake ruined the life of your own child and me, the one you promised to love, the one with whom you swore eternal love in church." His voice broke, and he ran his hand over his face. The flash of anger had subsided, leaving only endless fatigue. Emma added quietly, wiping away her tears. "I spent my entire childhood asking myself why my real mother abandoned me. What was wrong with me? This feeling of inferiority, it stayed with me forever." Linda shook her head, exclaiming, "No, you were not guilty of anything. It was me." She stopped short, realizing she had let it slip. A heavy silence fell. Then Detective Stevens broke it with an official tone. "Mrs. Miller, you have just effectively admitted that you forged a death certificate and illegally placed a child up for adoption without the father's consent." Linda was alarmed. I didn't admit that." Kate looked at her coldly. "Everything said here can be documented. We have enough written evidence. I assure you, the prosecutor will have many questions for you." Linda rushed towards James, clasping her hands in a pleading gesture. "James, for God's sake, stop them. Why stir up the past? You have a daughter now. Everything ended well. Don't ruin my life, please." James recoiled as if from the touch of a snake. "Are you asking for mercy? After everything?" Linda sobbed, tears welling up in her eyes for the first time during the entire conversation. "Please, I have a family, children. They don't know anything. Robert won't forgive me." "Who did I have to forgive?" he asked quietly. "What was your mercy towards me based on? You broke my family, and now you're afraid for yours." Linda burst into tears. She tried to grab Emma's hands. "My daughter. Emma, I know I don't deserve it, but I'm sorry. I was scared then, confused. Maybe I did something bad, but I wanted the best." Emma stepped back, pulling her hands away. "Don't call me daughter. You had no right to treat me like that." Linda covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. It was at that moment that the front door of the living room opened and a tall, middle-aged man appeared on the threshold, apparently Robert Miller. Behind him peered two curious teenage faces, Linda's son and daughter. Apparently, the family had returned. "Linda, what's going on here?" Robert's voice sounded indignant and worried. Linda turned to face the family, her face distorted by tears. "Robert, children." Her children, a boy of about 16 and a girl of about 14, looked at what was happening in complete bewilderment. James stepped back, not wanting to make a scene in front of the teenagers, but it was too late. Detective Stevens stepped forward, showing his badge. "Mr. Miller, I'm a police detective. I'm afraid we need to tell you something and ask your wife a few questions." Robert frowned. "Questions? Linda, what's the matter? Who are these people?" He glanced at James and Emma, lingering on their tear-stained faces, and the enraged Linda. Linda rushed to her husband. "Robert, please take the children upstairs. I'll explain everything." But Emma suddenly spoke, looking straight at Robert. "Your wife has a lot to tell. For example, 20 years ago, she lied about the death of her child." Robert turned pale. "What? What is she talking about, Linda?" James put his arm around Emma's shoulders, trying to reason with her. Maybe we shouldn't." But the girl continued, this time addressing her half-brother and sister, who stood with wide eyes. "You have an older sister you didn't know about. It's me." What?" The teenage girl stammered, clinging to her father. Linda began to sob even louder. "No, it's not true." However, the detective stopped her with a gesture. "It's better to be honest, Mrs. Miller. Your family will have to find out the truth anyway." Robert put his arms around the children's shoulders. "Come on upstairs, boys," he told them as calmly as he could. "I'll talk to you later." The children reluctantly complied, casting shocked glances at their mother. As they disappeared up the second floor, Robert turned to Linda. "Explain. What's going on here? What other sister?" Linda, having lost the audience in the form of children, sank down on the sofa and began to sob. "Robert, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Many years ago, in my first marriage, I had a daughter, but I said that she died and gave her up for adoption." Jesus Christ. Robert ran his hand over his face. You told me that the child didn't survive then. I lied. Linda closed her eyes, unable to bear her husband's gaze. Forgive me. Robert sank into a chair, stunned. He was silent, trying to digest what he had heard. Finally, he asked quietly, "Is that her?" He nodded towards Emma. Linda nodded slightly. Yes. Robert looked at Emma, then at James, guessing. You are her father? Yes, James confirmed bitterly. Your wife's ex-husband. Robert closed his eyes and shook his head. God, Linda, how could you? There was deep disappointment and disgust in his voice. Linda rushed towards him again. Robert, darling, please, I was afraid of losing you. You wouldn't have married me. Robert pulled away, looking at her with an icy gaze. And now, what about you? You won't lose me? Do you think I can live with a woman who is capable of this? Lying to everyone around for 20 years? Linda began to sob, trying to grab his hand, but he stood up, avoiding the touch. Mr. Miller, Detective Stevens interjected, we understand this is a shock to you. Your wife may have to answer questions from investigators in the near future. Investigations? Robert looked up at him. Yes, there are serious violations of the law, forgery of documents, violation of the adoption procedure. We are forced to begin an official investigation. Linda raised her head, a grimace of horror frozen on her face. Robert. He just sighed heavily and turned away. James realized that their mission was now complete. He gently put his arm around Emma's shoulders. Let's get out of here, he said softly. The girl was still crying, but she nodded. They headed for the exit. Kate said goodbye to Linda. We will contact your lawyer, Mrs. Miller. The detective remained talking to the silent Robert, while James and Emma went out onto the porch. The fresh air hit her face. Emma staggered down the path and suddenly covered her face with her hands, bursting into tears. James was there immediately, hugging her, stroking her back. "SHH, it's all over, darling. That's it, we did it," he whispered, feeling his heart ache with pity and love for this fragile girl. Why is she like that? Emma sobbed into his chest. How could she, Dad? Hearing this, Dad, James hugged her even tighter, fighting back tears himself. I don't know, my dear. I don't know. Sometimes the worst comes out in people. A few minutes later, Kate joined them, calmly closing the door of the Miller's house behind her. The lawyer looked satisfied. Well, I think that's enough for today. Linda is broken, and the police will have enough evidence. Do you think she'll go to jail? Emma asked quietly. Kate sighed. It's hard to say. The laws are complicated. The statute of limitations can prevent her from going to prison. But I think she'll get a suspended sentence or something like that, plus her reputation is ruined. I doubt she'll be able to live her life the same way after this. James nodded silently. A strange emptiness was spreading inside him, but also relief. The truth had finally come out. Thank you, Kate, he said sincerely, shaking the lawyer's hand. We couldn't have done it without you. I'm happy to help, she replied. Keep me informed if anything happens, and I'll help you on business. After saying goodbye, Kate headed to her car. James and Emma stood there for a few more minutes, recovering from what they had experienced. Finally, James asked, Are you okay? Emma thoughtfully wiped her eyes one last time. Yeah, I guess. I'm glad we told her everything. I wish I could hear a real apology from her, but... She smiled sadly. I don't think she's capable of genuine regret yet, James said softly. It'll take time, if ever. But at least we knew the truth. Emma nodded. That's what I wanted. They moved towards the car. Before getting in, Emma suddenly stopped. You know what I was thinking? She called it digging up the past. But for me, it's not just the past. It's my life, and yours too. James smiled at her, truly warmly for the first time that day. And now our lives are united again. She responded with a timid smile. Second chance. Yes, he opened the car door for her. A second chance to be a family. 2 months have passed since the events at Linda Miller's house. Life is gradually entering a new direction for all those involved. 2 months have passed since Linda's revelation. Her life has been turned upside down. A local Cleveland newspaper published an article about the case without naming names, but acquaintances quickly put two and two together. Neighbors whispered, friends avoided her. Robert, shaken by the betrayal, said he needed time and temporarily moved out, leaving Linda alone. He began consulting with a divorce lawyer, but has not yet filed the papers, trying to make sense of what happened for the sake of his children. Their son and daughter, having learned the truth, were confused. They alternated between being angry at their mother and trying to understand her by spending more time with their father and grandmother. Linda, broken by the condemnation, begged her family for a chance to explain herself, but so far her words were lost in the abyss of mistrust. Linda also suffered legal consequences. The state attorney general's office charged her with falsifying official documents. She appeared broken at the hearing. In the end, given the time frame and her clean record, Linda was given probation, community service, and ordered to pay a large amount of legal costs. She avoided prison, but the price for her lies was still steep. James felt no gloating over the verdict. Rather, he felt a deep satisfaction that justice had been done. But he was now much more concerned with the present than with the past. He and Emma tried to spend every weekend together, making up for lost time. Sometimes he would go to Cincinnati to learn about her life. Sometimes she would come to Columbus. One of the most touching meetings was Emma's meeting with James's mother, her own grandmother. Soon after the DNA results were confirmed, James called his mother and told her the stunning news. The elderly Mrs. Clark, who had thought her granddaughter was dead for 20 years, could hardly believe it. At first she only repeated into the phone, "It can't be," and then burst into tears of happiness. The very next day, James took Emma to his hometown, where his mother lived. Emma was very nervous before the meeting, but as soon as the door opened, her grandmother hugged her with tears of joy, repeating, "My granddaughter, alive. Thank God." They couldn't let go of each other for a long time. Later, Mrs. Clark showed Emma old family photos of James, told her about her son's pranks in childhood, and Emma smiled and noted the familiar features of her father in the youthful photos. That day united 3 generations of the family: grandmother, father, and daughter who had been separated by lies for so many years. Since then, Mrs. Clark often called her granddaughter and even mastered video communication to admire Emma on the screen. She could not be happier that her prayer for a miracle was finally answered. Mark and Susan Davis, Emma's adoptive parents, were wonderful people. They warmly welcomed James into their circle, happy that their daughter had reconnected with her biological father. On his first visit to Cincinnati, they hosted a family dinner. Mark, a short, good-natured man, shook James's hand firmly. "I've heard so much about you. Nice to finally meet you." Susan hugged him like an old friend. "Thank you for not turning away from Emma." Although, of course, what father would refuse such a treasure? James smiled, rubbing his neck sheepishly. "It is I who should thank you. You have raised an amazing girl." There were many warm words at the table. James talked about himself, asked about Emma's childhood, those moments he had not seen. Susan brought old photo albums. Here was little Emma taking her first steps. Here she was in a costume at a school performance. Here she was winning a track and field competition in high school. James looked at these pictures with a light sadness and joy at the same time. Emma sat next to him, commenting on each photo, and he caught himself thinking that he was reliving her childhood with her, at least through stories. In Columbus, James's friends also showered Emma with attention. Mike organized a celebratory barbecue, inviting neighbors and acquaintances, in fact, so that everyone could meet Jim's daughter, who was found after years. Emma was initially embarrassed by such intense interest, but the warmth of society quickly relaxed her. Neighbors who remembered James when he was still married were sincerely happy for him. Elderly Mrs. Henderson, who lived across the street, shed tears as she hugged Emma. "We were all so sad when the little one passed away, and now you're back with your dad. A miracle, there's no other way to say it." James stood nearby, feeling a lump in his throat at the words. he could only quietly reply, "Yes, a real miracle." Here Mike, who had been watching the scene from the side, patted his friend on the back and pulled him aside a little. Joy for James sparkled in his eyes. "Well, are you a happy father?" He winked cheerfully. James exhaled, looking around at the noisy group around him, where Emma was laughing with the neighbors' children. "You bet, Mike. Honestly, I'm still afraid to wake up. What if this is a dream?" Mike shook his head. "No, my friend, it's all true. I'm so happy for you. You've been through so much. Now everything will be different." The friends hugged, and James felt that now the happiness had become final and shared with all his loved ones. Over time, James and Emma developed their own routine of communication. On weekdays, they would call each other daily, or at least write letters, discussing the little things of the day. Emma would share her academic successes and the minor dramas of university life. James would tell her about funny incidents in the workshop, send photos of particularly interesting cars that came to him for repairs. On weekends, they would meet in person. Sometimes they would go fishing together in the Columbus area, to James's surprise. Emma quickly got the hang of it and even put the bait on the hook herself, laughing at her awkwardness. Sometimes they would visit museums or sports matches. It turned out that they both had a passion for basketball, and they became ardent fans of the local team. Watching how quickly Emma had become part of his life, James felt a deep gratitude to fate. His once quiet, empty house had come to life. Although Emma did not live with him permanently, they spent a lot of time there when she visited. James, with his characteristic thoroughness, turned the room that had been a guest room for 20 years into Emma's room. Together, they chose new paint for the walls, furniture, and brought some of her things and photographs from Cincinnati. For him, this was symbolic. Finally, his daughter's things had found their place in his home and heart. One such evening, while sitting in the living room over a cup of tea, Emma suddenly asked, "Dad, do you have any things left? Well, connected to me?" From that time, James realized what she meant, perhaps some memorable detail from Linda's pregnancy or birth. He thought about it, then nodded. Yes, there is one." He went into the bedroom and returned with the same ultrasound picture he had kept behind glass for 20 years. Emma picked up the yellowed picture, in which the tiny white body of the embryo was barely visible. "It's you," James said softly. "You were about 5 months in utero. We had an ultrasound, and I insisted on taking the picture as a keepsake." Emma's lips trembled. "Have you kept it all these years?" "Yes." He sat down next to her, hugging his daughter. "It was the only thing I had left of you." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a few minutes. Then Emma said quietly, "So much has been lost, but I want you to know you have already become family to me, as if you had never disappeared from life." James's eyes filled with tears. He turned her face towards him. "You too for me, darling. It was like I found meaning again when you knocked on my door." Emma smiled through her tears. "Next time I won't knock, I have my own key now." They laughed. Indeed, James, 2 weeks after everything, gave her a duplicate key to the house, saying sheepishly, "Just in case you have to come and I'm not there." Emma accepted the key with joy. The gesture meant more to her than 1,000 words. That night, as he lay down to sleep, James stared at the ceiling for a long time, thinking about the vicissitudes of life. 20 years ago, he had lost everything, or so he thought. But life had suddenly given him a chance to get it all back. Not quite everything his daughter's lost childhood was something he could never make up for. But he had a whole life ahead of him in which they would be together. He rolled over and glanced at the framed photograph on his nightstand. He had put it there only recently, a picture of him and Emma hugging on the lake during their last trip. They were both smiling happily, truly. James spoke quietly into the silence of the night. "Thank you." He himself did not know to whom this gratitude was addressed, either to God or to fate. The main thing was that peace had finally reigned in his soul. Emma didn't sleep that night either. She sat by the moonlit window of her room and reread old diary entries. Once, as a teenager, She wrote down her thoughts about her biological parents. She didn't know anything then. In one of her entries as a 10th grader, she naively wrote, "I hope that someday I will find my real dad, and he will be a good man." Emma smiled through her tears, closing the diary. Her hope had come true. She picked up her phone and typed a message. "Are you asleep? I just wanted to say thank you, Dad, for being there." After sending it, Emma took a deep breath. There was no longer that aching emptiness inside her that had lived there for years. Yes, the wounds of the past would not disappear instantly, but now she had her biological father next to her, ready to support and protect her. She had two families who loved her, and that was all she needed. The phone beeped softly, a response from James. "Thank you too, daughter. Good night." Emma hugged the phone to her chest with a smile and closed her eyes. This story was not a fairy tale. There was a lot of pain, deception, and loss, but it became an example of how the truth, albeit belatedly, wins over lies. That broken destinies can be healed with love and perseverance. James and Emma got their second chance, a chance to build a relationship that was taken from them by deception, and they intended not to miss it. New memories awaited them ahead, this time shared. Sometimes life gives an amazing gift the chance to start over, even after long years of darkness. James Clark and his daughter Emma accepted this gift with gratitude. They had a future difficult, like everyone else's, but now they had a common one, and that was the main thing. They had found each other, and therefore they had found hope and happiness, their second chance. D4, everyone who listened to my story to the end, thank you so much. You are incredible. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment to support me. And here are some details for those who are interested in how Linda managed to pull it all off. Let's continue. Linda Clark was 25 in 2005, married to James Clark, an auto mechanic from suburban Columbus, Ohio. Their marriage, which had begun with love and hope, was falling apart at the seams when Linda became pregnant. Financial difficulties. James was just starting to build his own auto repair shop, which was making a modest profit added to the strain. Linda, an administrator at a local company, dreamed of a more secure life. The pregnancy, which the couple had initially planned, became an unexpected burden. She began to question whether she wanted to stay married to James, whom she considered insufficiently ambitious. A key turning point came when Linda met Robert Miller, a Cleveland businessman and client of her company. Robert, 10 years her senior, was successful, charismatic, and promised her the life she dreamed of. Their affair began a few months before the birth, and Linda, excited by the new prospect, increasingly distanced herself from James. But the baby became a problem. Robert made it clear that he was not ready to raise someone else's baby, and Linda feared that her past with James would ruin her chances for a new life. She was trapped. Divorce was possible, but James, as the legal father, would have custody of the child, which could tie her to him for years. Linda made a radical decision to get rid of the child without leaving a trace. She could not get rid of the pregnancy, it was already late, but she did not intend to raise her daughter. Adoption seemed like a way out, but open adoption through government agencies would require James's consent. Linda decided to go for deception, to stage the child's death so that James would not look for his daughter and secretly give her up for adoption. It was cynical, but as it seemed to her, the only way to cut ties with the past. Linda had been planning since she was 7 months pregnant, when her affair with Robert had become serious. She knew that several elements were needed to make the plan work: a fake death certificate, a secret adoption, and a plausible story for James. Linda didn't have a lot of money. Her salary and modest savings barely covered her daily expenses, but she had organizational skills and a knack for manipulating people. The first step was to create the image of a single mother. Linda registered at St. Mary's under her maiden name, Linda Welsh. She told the staff that she was unmarried and the father of the child was unknown. This was possible because in the United States in 2005, hospitals did not always strictly require a check of marital status, especially if the patient provided identification. Linda used an old student ID with her maiden name, which she had not yet updated after her marriage. This allowed her to avoid mentioning James in the hospital records. To convince James that her child had died, Linda decided to forge a death certificate. She knew that it was impossible to obtain an official document from the state registry without an actual death, but she needed a plausible form that James would not check in his grief. Here she turned to a casual acquaintance, Danny Reeves, a former colleague at the company who had been fired for petty fraud. Danny, who worked at a printing house, had access to forms and seals, as well as connections to shady people willing to forge documents for a small fee. Linda contacted him, presenting it as a personal favor. She paid Danny $200, all she could spare from her savings, for a death certificate form bearing the seal of St. Mary's Hospital and the signature of a fictitious physician, Dr. William Harris. Danny, without asking unnecessary questions, fulfilled the order, using old forms that sometimes got lost in the hospital archives. Linda also thought about how to explain the absence of the baby's body. She decided to tell James that the baby had been stillborn and that the hospital had taken care of the cremation, as was sometimes done with newborns. She hoped that James, overcome with grief, would not press for details. To add credibility, Linda organized a small farewell ceremony at a local chapel, inviting only a few acquaintances to avoid unnecessary questions. The ceremony cost $50, the minimum rent for the space, which she covered from her savings. The trickiest part of the plan was the secret adoption. Linda knew that government agencies would require the father's consent, so she turned to a private broker. Through a colleague who had heard about discreet adoptions, she found Richard Barnes, a Toledo attorney who specializes in private adoptions. Barnes was known for arranging adoptions quickly and with minimal scrutiny for a good fee. In 2005, private adoptions in the U.S. were less regulated than they are today, and lawyers like Barnes often operated in a gray area, especially if the mother claimed the father was absent. Linda contacted Barnes 2 months before she was due to give birth. She introduced herself as Linda Welch, a single woman who wanted to give up her baby. Barnes asked for $1,500 for his services, an amount Linda did not have. However, Robert Miller, already involved in her life, agreed to help. Linda lied to him that she needed the money for medical expenses due to pregnancy complications. Robert, unaware of the deception, wired her $2,000, of which Linda paid Barnes and saved the rest for her move to Cleveland. Barnes, in turn, did not check her marital status, satisfied with a verbal assurance that there was no father. Linda signed the child's abandonment papers, listing the father as unknown, and provided a fake ID with her maiden name. Barnes found an adoptive family, Mark and Susan Davis of Cincinnati, who had long wanted a child. He assured them that the mother was a single woman in a difficult situation, and the adoption was completely legal. The Davises, trusting the lawyer, paid for his services and hospital expenses, which covered Linda's additional costs. Barnes arranged for the child to be handed over a week after the birth, when Linda was discharged from the hospital. He also prepared a birth certificate for the newborn, where the mother was listed as Linda Clark. She used her last name for official documents, and the father remained unlisted. This certificate became the basis for the adoption, and Linda signed a waiver of parental rights, leaving no trace of her marriage to James. On the 5th of June 2005, Linda gave birth to a healthy baby girl at St. Mary's Hospital. The birth was uncomplicated, and the baby, named Baby Girl Clark on the paperwork, was registered as Linda Clark's daughter. She used her husband's surname on hospital forms, but did not list the father. Linda informed staff that she did not want anyone, including her husband, to be present at the birth, citing personal circumstances. James, busy with work and trusting his wife, did not suspect anything was amiss. Linda had arranged with Barnes in advance that the baby would be collected immediately after discharge. A day later, on June 6th, Linda and the newborn were discharged. She returned home alone, leaving her daughter at the hospital under the care of a nurse connected to Barnes. Barnes arranged for the baby to be handed over to the Davises through a representative who flew the infant to Cincinnati. Linda, returning to James, staged a scene of grief. She sobbed, produced a forged death certificate, and said the baby had been stillborn. James, shocked, believed her without asking for proof. Linda convinced him that the hospital had taken care of cremation and arranged a quick funeral to close the subject. A month after the birth, Linda filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. James, still in mourning, did not resist, thinking Linda could not cope with the loss. The divorce was finalized quickly, as the couple had no joint assets other than modest savings, which they divided. Linda received about $1,000, which she added to the money from Robert to start a new life. In late 2005, Linda quit her job and moved to Cleveland, where Robert rented an apartment for her. She changed her phone number and cut off contact with her former acquaintances so that James could not find her. In 2006, Linda married Robert, taking his last name Miller. She told him that the child from her first marriage had died, and Robert, unaware of the deception, accepted her version. Linda began a new life, giving birth to 2 children and creating an image of the ideal wife and mother. Linda was not a cold-blooded criminal. Her actions were motivated by a mixture of selfishness, fear, and desperation. She justified herself by saying that the child would go to a good family and that James would deal with his grief. However, her plan required suppressing her conscience. She sometimes thought about her daughter, but forced herself to forget in order to protect her new life. This internal conflict emerged 20 years later, when she broke under the pressure of the truth. Linda's deception was possible thanks to her own calculations, the vulnerabilities of the system, and the help of several people who were wittingly or unwittingly involved in the scheme. She used false documents, manipulated trust, and acted quickly to cover her tracks. Her limited resources were compensated for by Robert's money and the negligence of the middlemen. The story shows how personal weaknesses and systemic flaws can lead to tragedy, but it also highlights how the truth, albeit belatedly, finds its way out. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.